In the year 1099, a holy city burned, and men believed God was watching from the silent, smoke-filled sky. They shouted a single phrase, "God wills it," and the world changed in a heartbeat, forever. But what kind of God demands blood from both believers and unbelievers who pray in different tongues? Jerusalem was sacred to three faiths, yet claimed by none without war and 1,000 broken oaths. This was never just a war of religion. It was hunger, power, and fear wearing a sacred mask. Stay with me, and I'll show you how a prayer became a massacre without mercy, without pause. Europe was poor, but its faith was rich and desperate for meaning. For many, life promised nothing except salvation after death if they obeyed without question. And then, forgiveness was offered. Not earned, promised to anyone willing to bleed. One speech turned desperation into destiny and set hearts on fire. Men sold their land. Women watched them leave. Children learned new prayers for fathers who might never return. They walked thousands of miles without knowing what awaited them beyond the next horizon. Faith can inspire, and faith can destroy when fear becomes a fuel. In the East, life continued, unaware of the storm approaching from distant, foreign lands. Muslims, Christians, Jews, living under fragile balance that could shatter overnight. Stories arrived before soldiers, and fear followed like a shadow that never leaves. Walls were reinforced. Prayers were whispered in corners where hope hid. Neither side truly understood the other, and that ignorance became a weapon. Belief demands sacrifice, but never tells you the price until it's already paid. Not all enemies carried swords. Some arrived in the body and mind. Because turning back meant losing heaven and facing shame at home. Then they saw it. The city they believed would save them, glowing like a dream ahead. To them, Jerusalem was not a city. It was a reward written in their prayers. What followed was not holy, not in the way they imagined. Once blood is spilled, faith has no brakes, only momentum and madness. Jerusalem stood silent for the last time before the storm finally arrived. What happened next would echo for centuries through songs, sermons, and scars. Before the massacre, there was belief, pure, blinding, and unstoppable. And belief can be the most dangerous weapon of all when mercy is forgotten. To understand this war, we must step inside the lives it destroyed before the world turned to ash. Behind the walls, life continued, quietly as if war was a distant rumor. Most people were not warriors. They were parents, merchants, children trying to survive another day. Faith lived in daily rituals, not battle cries spoken softly in private spaces. Food was simple. Every meal mattered more than anyone admitted aloud. Children learned fear before history, before understanding why it existed. Muslims, Christians, Jews, sharing streets shaped by centuries of uneasy coexistence. Peace existed, but it was fragile and easily broken by rumor. Order was enforced by law and belief with watchful, silent eyes. Rumors traveled faster than truth, especially in fearful times. Everyone felt it. Something was coming, and no one could stop it. As fear grew, prayers multiplied, seeking protection from the unseen. People searched for signs, any sign that promised safety or hope. Belief comforted the powerless when nothing else could. But belief also controlled behavior through fear of divine judgment. In this world, everything led to salvation or loss, with no middle ground left. Siege tightened slowly, like a closing hand around the city's throat. Hunger reshapes morality and reveals hidden desperation. Fear stopped being shocking. It became routine, woven into daily existence. Nights were the worst, when imagination filled the dark. The city had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Mothers waited, without answers, only silence and distant sounds. Some prepared to fight, others to die without ever saying goodbye. Children listened to adult fears and remembered them forever, long after the war ended. This was not a battlefield yet. It was a city of lives hanging by fragile threads. History rarely records moments like these before violence erases them. Then, something changed, and tension snapped instantly. Fear stopped whispering and began shouting through streets and hearts alike. Once the walls break, so does restraint, and mercy quickly follows. This was the last night of normal life before everything collapsed. What followed was not conquest. It was devastation unleashed without control or pause. At dawn, the gates finally broke after weeks of brutal pressure. What followed was not war. It was slaughter, without restraint or hesitation. Men prayed, then killed in God's name, believing righteousness excused everything. Jerusalem drowned in blood as screams echoed through stone streets. Victory came, without honor and without moral triumph. The conquerors stayed, turning victory into occupation. They ruled lands they did not understand nor truly respect. Success bred arrogance and blindness to future danger. But enemies watched and remembered every insult and loss. The Crusader states believed they were untouchable, protected by walls and faith. The Muslim world did not forget nor forgive the humiliation. Humiliation turned into resolve, forged through patience and unity. Division slowly gave way to unity against a common enemy. And then, one man changed everything without shouting or spectacle. Not driven by fury, but discipline and long-term vision. History remembers him as Saladin, but his enemies felt his presence first. He fought wars before battles began through planning and restraint. Saladin waited, letting time weaken his enemies. Then he struck, at the perfect moment when escape was impossible. At Hattin, the Crusader army collapsed from thirst, heat, and exhaustion. Jerusalem fell again, but history would remember how. But this time, there was no massacre, no rivers of blood. Mercy shocked the world more than violence ever could. Even enemies respected him and recorded his restraint. The balance of power had shifted, both militarily and morally. But the war did not end. It only changed shape. Legends replaced victories, and truth slowly blurred. Truth became myth, retold through biased memory. What remains is memory passed down through generations. To understand the Crusades, we must face their legacy without choosing sides. Empires don't move on their own. They move through people with ambition, fear, and belief. Crusader kings ruled through faith and fear wrapped in sacred authority. Some sought redemption. Others sought glory and eternal recognition. Opposing them were leaders fighting for survival of land and people. Not every victory was won with blood. Some were won with patience. Two worlds, one land claimed by both destinies. Even enemies recognized honor across cultural divides. Stories outlived the battles and shaped collective memory. But truth faded behind legend retold by generations. History remembers selectively and forgets the rest. The Crusades lasted nearly 200 years, spanning multiple generations. Most crusaders never reached Jerusalem, dying along the way. Many crusaders were peasants, not knights driven by desperation. Crusaders attacked fellow Christians during internal conflicts. Constantinople was sacked by crusaders, changing history forever. Trade increased, despite the violence connecting distant civilizations. Medical knowledge traveled between worlds, despite religious division. The Crusades reshaped Europe's identity politically and culturally. Religious hatred deepened for centuries, long after battles ended. Their legacy still echoes today in modern conflicts. The wars ended. The wounds did not heal with time. Memory outlives empires and outlasts power. Stories became identity for entire civilizations. East and West still remember, differently, through inherited perspectives. The lessons were written in blood, yet often ignored. Yet history repeats when memory fades. Because the past is never truly past, it shapes the present. This story belongs to all of us, beyond borders and faiths. Not to choose sides, but to understand what history reveals. History doesn't end. It waits to be understood by those who listen.